This is the Seller Process Podcast, where we talk about the best systems, processes, and SOPs for your Amazon business so that you can regain control of your time, build up your team, and scale your e-com empire.
Hello, entrepreneurs. If you're aware of the more and more stringent measures that Amazon is applying in keeping products compliant with the local rules, but you don't even know where to start to make your products compliant, then this episode is for you. Our guest today will share with us the process to make sure all your products stay compliant with regulations and directives all around the world so that you can have peace of mind and focus on growing your business. I'm joined today by Fredrik Grönkvist, a product compliance expert with several years' experience living in China and Vietnam, where he acquired a deep understanding of general product safety, lab testing procedures, labeling requirements, and certifications. Thanks to this acquired knowledge, Fredrik and his team in Hong Kong started developing ComplianceGate.com, a platform to help Amazon sellers and consumer brands manage the practical aspects of compliance. Hey, Fredrik, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you for inviting me. It's very hot and very humid here in Hong Kong today.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that. It's hot here too, actually, in Kuala Lumpur, but we have swimming pool, so we're fine.
We don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so you should come over to Kuala Lumpur. It's nice. All right. So obviously you're an expert in compliance, and it's something that I noticed that you obviously know better than me that all brands need to be compliant, stay compliant with the rules, and Amazon is now cracking down on those products that are not compliant, and it's becoming more serious with staying compliant because Amazon received lots of fines, so they want to stay on top of all the regulations. And at the same time, the regulations become more stringent, especially in Europe. That we know that regulators in Europe have fun making new rules every couple of months, so it makes it difficult. It makes it good for consumers in Europe, but difficult for brands selling in Europe, right? So we'll cover today a little bit of both, like US and Europe, which are the main marketplace for Amazon sellers. But the main thing is that people don't even know where to start. If we are asking people like, is your product compliant? They don't even know like how to verify that, where they can find the information. So let's cover today the process to go through for people, to understand what's the process they should follow to be compliant. So where do we start? Tell me like how should we identify what regulations our products should comply with?
I think the very first thing you need to do is to understand the components that compliance make up in real life, to understand what you as a seller need to actually do practically to ensure compliance. And on top of everything, we have regulations that may cover, say, electronics with a certain input voltage, or it could be a certain age group, right? Children's products, or if it's in contact with food or beverage, such as kitchen appliances, etc. You may have a regulation for that. Now, within this regulation, you have subsections, components that define, say, chemical restrictions, setting the maximum allowed level or limit, or even a ban when it comes to phthalates, lead, nickel, mercury, etc. That's the first thing we need to look at. The second thing we need to look at is safety standards. Is the regulation providing safety requirements? Is it even referencing, providing us with a list of mandatory safety standards? Say in the United States, there's ASTM, in the EU, there's EN standards, and so on. Okay, so that's the second thing. 3, we need to look at labeling requirements. What do I need to print on the product and on the packaging? 4, documentation. Do I need user instructions? Do I need warning instructions? Do I need a certificate? Do I need to provide some sort of declaration? Do I need to prepare technical documentation? And finally, testing. Do I need to submit my product and the packaging for third-party lab testing? And if that is the case, do I need to go to a certain accredited testing company, or will any testing company do? These are the components. This is step one. You need to understand the components to know what to look for. Now, second, when you go out and you try to identify regulations, the bad news is that there's no centralized database. There's no centralized database in the US or the EU. Well, in the EU, there sort of is, but there's no single page where you're going to find a list of every single regulation that applies to all consumer products. So in the EU, where you need to start, that would be the European Commission website. The hard part is to navigate this, to actually read these regulatory texts, these directive texts, and assess, okay, which of these, say, 50 different regulations and directives that you're looking at apply to my product. So that can be hard. In the US, you can look at the CPSC website, you can look at FTC. They provide a lot of information about, say, general consumer product safety requirements. FTC, very good source for labeling requirements. FCC for electronics, FDA, and also UL when it comes to electronics. So in the US, it's a bit more scattered. So unfortunately, there's no single point of entry or single point where you need to start.
Okay, I see. So actually, guys, remember that in every episode, we are sharing some complementary material that you can download from our website, thesellerprocess.com, or in the description of the YouTube video. So in this episode, you will find that Fredrik pulled together a checklist for product compliance, and you will find some of the links that he just shared with us. So go check that out. Remember to download that from the show notes of this episode. So some of the, I understand that you're saying there is no central place where people can find information. In my case, what I've done is basically, trying to gather information from blogs, websites, or ChatGPT even. I don't know if that's safe. So I always want to double check those information, but it knows a lot, as we know, and or consultants. I've worked also with consultants that help me kind of understand what are the general points that we should comply with. So it's a lot about the category, as you mentioned. So can you share maybe more about what are some of the categories of products that require some special attention? Because there are like directives that are general to most products and directives that are more focused on specific categories. So let's see what are these special categories, and then we'll go through also the general requirements that may apply to most products.
So we can start with the US then.
Okay.
And if we divide this into the EU and the US, and we begin with the US now, there aren't that many, say, generic requirements, because as you pointed out, it does depend on the category. It depends on the age group. It depends on the input voltage sometimes. It depends on if you have wireless communications like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 5G, and so on built in. So there are some things that do apply to essentially all consumer products in the US, and that would be, say, the country of origin marking, that you need to specify the country of origin. So that's required. There's UPLR, that's a uniform packaging labeling regulation that's adopted in a majority of states. Law labeling for stuff products, but then again, is that generic? Another, say, generic regulation, if I can use that term, would be California Proposition 65. If you sell in California, essentially any consumer product, you need to comply with California Prop 65, which essentially restricts chemicals and heavy metals. And you either need to verify compliance or provide warning labeling. These are the two options you have. But most requirements are tied directly to the category or to some aspects such as the age group. And in the US, if you sell children's products, you need to comply with the CPSIA. And this is under the umbrella of the CPSC. That's a Consumer Product Safety Commission in the United States. They have a fantastic website you should check up. Just go to cpsc.gov, I think. And other than children's products, they also provide an extensive list of mandatory standards. And this is really where I would say there's a lot happening in the world of product safety in the United States. There are requirements coming in for magnets. I think that's already in place. Furniture, stability, and so on. So it's not just for children's products. If you sell any consumer product, you need to stay up to date with the list of mandatory standards on the CPSC website. And this is something you can find online. There are also food contact material regulations in the US. You can find information about that on FDA website. That would be anything that's in contact with food or beverage. That could be cutlery, drinking bottles, and so on. Electronics as FCC, that's primarily about communications, about EMC compliance and using the right frequencies when your device is communicating using radio waves, and that will be Wi-Fi, that will be Bluetooth. So that's something you absolutely have to consider. It's fairly complex. When it comes to safety, it is important to understand that there are not mandatory safety standards for everything in the United States. Look at batteries, for example. Amazon has made it mandatory to sell batteries that are compliant with, I think, UL 1642. Now, what can be tricky here is that this UL standard is not mandatory per se, but Amazon has decided that if you want to sell anything with lithium batteries in the US, you have to comply with this standard. And end of the day, if you're selling something in the United States with or without pre-existing mandatory standards, and something happens, you're still facing a recall. This is very important to understand, that this goes beyond ticking boxes. This goes beyond just looking for, okay, what are the bare minimum requirements for my specific product, for my age group, and so on and so forth. You need to understand and assess if your product is designed in a way that is always safe to use.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So just recently, I've been doing so much research on product compliance because of, we're kind of setting up, solid foundation for our brands to go to eight figures. So we want to make sure that we are actually able to do that with having all the product compliant to all the rules. And I've learned that also, and as you've mentioned, there are these kind of categories that require some special treatment, like as you said, like food contact products and electronics, or products for kids or toys, right? So in this case, for example, that this might be the most relevant to Amazon sellers. For example, like baby products or electronics or supplements. This might be products that are very common in the Amazon space. What should people selling these categories should know about, and where can they find more information? How can they stay compliant? What is your tips for these categories, which I think are the three kind of outlier categories that are more present in the Amazon marketplace?
So it was supplements, and what were the other two?
So supplements, toys, like kids products, and electronics.
Okay, so if we stick to the United States, because the EU is completely different. If we stick to the US, now when it comes to electronics, communications between devices and using certain frequencies radio frequencies, this is under FCC, okay? Unintentional or intentional radiators, this is what you need to look up on the FCC. There's different documentation requirements, different testing requirements, different certification procedures. And this ultimately comes down to, is your device, does it have wireless communications built in, okay? Can it communicate through 5G, through LTE, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so on? Then there are stricter certification requirements. But even if it doesn't, there's still EMC requirements that you have to take into consideration. But it doesn't cover the safety aspects. And this is also what I mentioned about Amazon. Now, in the US, there are voluntary standards that do apply to electronics developed by UL standards developed by Underwriters Laboratories, are recognized in North America. Now, these are, unless referenced by a regulation, not generally speaking, not mandatory. But Amazon has made some of these mandatory for selling on their platform.
I see. Okay.
Children's products, you need to look at CPSAA. And that's under the CPSC. That's another regulation that I also mentioned. So you need to look at the CPSAA that covers everything from up to 12 years of age, all consumer products, not just toys, but all products that are for 12-year-olds or younger go on the CPSAA. And under CPSAA, there are standards that are referenced, meaning they're made mandatory. And that's not just for Amazon, but that's for selling the product in the United States. So that's a federal requirement. That means you have to comply with the CPSAA regardless of where in the United States you're selling this children's product. You need to create a CPC, that's a children's product certificate. You need to arrange lab testing with a CPSC accepted testing company, and you need to have certain tracking labels. There's also more that goes into this, but you find a lot of information on the CPSC website. Now, when it comes to supplements, it's not my area of expertise, but I believe you may be able to find guidance on the FDA website. There may be restrictions when it comes to, ingredients. You need to look at labeling requirements, lab testing. Then it also comes down to claims, the claims you're making about a product. And that's another dimension to this. We have seen sellers being shut down on Amazon because they are making, outlandish claims about their product having certain medical properties, that it can heal you in certain ways, or that it's antibacterial. For example, that might be enough to get you shut down, unless you have something that can actually prove this. That's also something to take into consideration when it comes to supplements.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And do you think the factories will be able to help people to providing with any documentation, lab tests, and everything needed, or do you think it's mostly on the seller side to make sure that everything is compliant?
It's 100% on the seller side. End of the day, if Amazon shuts you down, or if the US Customs or the EU Customs authorities, they deny entry, they reject your products, your supplier is not going to compensate you. It's not their job to keep track of the compliance requirements in markets where you're selling. That's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. I know for some products, the suppliers have to provide some documentation, but obviously, yeah, it's on your side to make sure that those are right and correct, and do the appropriate measure in order to modify anything. Okay, that's interesting. And do you think we can assume that Canada is a similar market in terms of compliance compared to the US, or people who are selling in the North American Amazon marketplace, they will need to totally redo everything from scratch and understanding the Canadian compliance, or we can assume that they're similar?
They should absolutely not assume that, because they aren't. Canada is a sovereign country, so they make their own regulations, and I don't really keep track of what goes on in Canada, but I'm not aware of any coordination between, say, the CPSC in the US and its counterpart in Canada.
Okay. I
So
asked you
it's
that also because, after Brexit, actually before Brexit, the UK had similar rules with, they share the same rules with the EU, the European Union. But now after Brexit, they obviously are like a different entity, let's say, in terms of regulation. So, but they maintain a lot of the same similar rules, right? So that's why I asked. So now I want to ask you about it. Let's shift gear and go to the European marketplace, which is more, much more complex environment in terms of compliance. And I wanted to ask you, like, what are the other like generic compliance element that can apply to most of products, and then later we could go also to touch some of the specific ones.
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. And yes, it is true that there are more regulations and directives. There are more, say, product-specific regulations and directives in the EU. That's not necessarily a bad thing for you as a seller, because that means that you actually have something that you can follow. Whereas if it's all based on voluntary standards, that's really expensive. If you need to, worst case, develop your own standards, which can actually happen. But anyway, let's stick to the topic. So let's look at the EU. Now, in the EU, there's two main things I want to raise that apply to essentially all consumer products. And first, we have REACH. So the REACH regulation restricts chemicals and heavy metals in all materials, essentially. And this is a very long list, and they keep expanding to it. Now, in order to verify REACH compliance, there's two ways you can go about this. You can buy a sample from your supplier, or you order a sample, you take an existing sample, and you send it for third-party testing. That way you get a test report. And you then have a list of tests, and hopefully the material, say a plastic or an alloy or something, will not contain a restricted substance. The other way is that you contact your supplier to request an existing test report. But I would say it's the chances they actually have something like this for your exact product is less than 1%. Other than that, other than REACH, we have the GPSD, the General Product Safety Directive, which is to be replaced by a General Product Safety Regulation, but that's a different topic. Essentially, what the GPSD states is that all products sold in the EU, regardless of whether there are regulations or directives that apply to this product, must be safe. We'll come back to the concept of safety as the very core, with or without existing standards. This principle is the same in the United States. It's the same in the EU. It's the same essentially everywhere. Now, the GPSD does provide some reference standards that you in that case must follow. If there are no existing reference standards under the GPSD, then you need to look for the second best alternative. There are also labeling requirements. Basic requirements under the GPSD would be product identification. That could be product model, product name, SKU, batch number for traceability, and your company information. So this is clearly stated in the GPSD. And sample testing more specifically, is also a requirement under the GPSD. So these are two things that apply to all consumer products in the EU.
What do you mean by sample testing? Like before, like kind of let's say the inspection before for every batch, like a quality inspection?
Not really, because a product can be of good quality, but it could be extremely unsafe at the same time. Let's say that I'm selling baby carriers, right? Now, you can have the best material in the world, but if it turns out that there's some sort of strangulation risk because the design is horrible, then quality doesn't mean anything here. So when I say testing here, this is about verifying that your product is meeting the safety criteria of the standards that you have applied. So it's not really about quality, although, yeah, there's correlation, but this goes beyond quality. This is about verifying that your product is safe. And while a GPSD, as far as I know, doesn't explicitly mention you need to go to a third party. You don't need to go to a third party like Kima or SGS or Intertech and so on. That's essentially what you have to do unless you have the equipment and the expertise to carry this testing out on your own, which if you're an Amazon seller, most likely you don't.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. All right. So obviously, a European marketplace, it's more complex, but as you mentioned, it might be even more clear in a way because, there are regulations for products. That's actually also something I've noticed by studying it recently. There is more information to learn, but it's more specific also. So that's a good point you mentioned, because in the US you kind of lost, you don't know what to follow, but in Europe it's a bit more well organized, let's say, although there is way more stuff to be aware of. Okay, now I'm curious to ask you, like, how is then Amazon handling the product compliance? What should we know when we sell the products in Amazon? Actually, I'm also interested in, because you are in this space, to see like the trends that you think Amazon will go through in the future on product compliance.
Right. So let's look at the triggers, like what makes Amazon take action. And one trigger for Amazon to take action, and we'll go into detail about what this action can be, but the first would be when you list a new product. And that's something we've seen more in recent years, that you list a children's product, then providing certain documentation is something you have to do by default. So that's one. And that's the best case scenario, because then you still have time to provide this documentation and these label files, test reports, before it's too late. The other one, the second trigger will be a routine check, that they can reach out for no apparent reason and say, hey, you're selling this product. We want you to provide this and that document, or this label file. That's the second one. The third one is in case they have received reports of safety issues. Now, that's why, again, it ties back to end-to-end. Even if there are no mandatory standards or, say, a regulation that covers your specific product, end of the day, if you have safety issues, if your product is not designed in a way that it can be used in a safe way, then they can take it down if they want to. And you can also have bigger issues with market surveillance authorities issuing a wider market, a nationwide recall, for example. And yeah, that's essentially what it comes down to, these three. There is a fourth one that is more rare, but we have been dealing with, and that's when sellers have made claims that they are selling products that they claim are, say, antibacterial, or perhaps they make claims about medical properties, that a certain consumer product can heal you in some way. Making such claims needs to be backed up. So I think these are the four reasons for why Amazon would take action. Now, what kind of action do they take? They tend to request 3 sets of documents. Now, the first thing they tend to require is a test report. And a test report, that can be a document showing if your specific product contains certain chemicals, if it's compliant with certain, say, electrical safety standards, battery safety standards, design safety standards, or for furniture, stability safety standards, children's products, small parts, etc. Test reports is really key here. The second thing will be certificates. Many regulations and directives, both in the EU and the US, require that you as a seller provides a declaration of conformity, or a GCC, or a children's product certificate. They request this as well. Finally, they also tend to request label photocopies of the product and the packaging. And this is to make sure that your product and the packaging is correctly labeled with, say, a batch number and the product name and the seller name, or in the EU, the CE mark, or in the UK, the UKCA mark, and so on.
Okay.
These are the 3 things they tend to require. And
Okay,
if you can't provide this, they have a deadline, and then that listing gets shut down.
Right. Okay, exactly. Have you found cases in which the whole account was shut down because of a product compliance issue, or is it just usually referring to just that one product that is not compliant?
Interesting question. No, I can't say that I am aware of any such case. Now, it's important to note that I mentioned that when businesses come to us and they have these compliance issues, they don't let us know what happens in case of failure. Like, so we don't really know what happens in case it turns out that they simply don't have the test reports. Maybe they're selling non-compliant products. They might be selling unsafe products, in which case you can't do anything about it. Your product shouldn't simply not be on Amazon because it's unsafe. But I'm not aware of any case in which Amazon has shut down the account completely. But I know because I've read many of Amazon's emails where they do warn that if you try to resubmit the same product but in a separate listing as a workaround to providing compliance documentation, then they can shut down your account. But that's all I know.
Okay, got it. Understand. All right, yeah. So we got lots of interesting information here. You guys will find more also in the guideline, the checklist that Fredrik put together for you guys. So you can go to the sellerprocess.com and find it in the show notes or in the description of the YouTube video. So I know this is a very complex topic, so we covered some of it. You will find more in this checklist. But if people are in need for more information or would like your help, how can they reach out to you and what can you offer? You can introduce a little bit of Compliance Gate, which is I'm a big fan of you guys. So you can share more of what's the platform is capable of.
Right. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for saying that. But we have developed a platform called the Compliance Gate platform. You can find it on compliancegate.com. And essentially it's a platform where you log in, you can create requirements lists by specifying, are you selling in the EU or the US? You specify the type of product, the category, materials, does it contain batteries, age group, etc. And the system is then generating a list of requirements, essentially a checklist of compliance requirements that would cover your product based on what you specified. You also get access to templates where you can create some of the certificates or the declarations that you need in be it the US or the EU, create label files for, say, CE marking, or create label files for children's products in the US, and finally book lab testing. So the files that Amazon would require, which would be labels, they would require the certificates, they would require test reports. That stuff can be done to a large extent on our platform. And beyond that, we also provide support so you can ask questions and we can provide further guidance that way. Because compliance is not only boring, it's also confusing, and we understand that.
Yeah, definitely. I found that, but in my case, it was very helpful to find this checklist of information all gather in one point, in one platform, thanks to your website. So it was very helpful for me. That's why I'm recommending it. So thank you again, Fredrik, for sharing your ideas and tips. It was very interesting. Maybe we'll have another day with more in-depth information about one specific aspect of product compliance one day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So guys, remember that the key to success is to emulate the best. So take action on the tips that Fredrik just shared with us. Download the materials and the checklist that it's available in our website, thesellerprocess.com. And take action. Take action on these tips. And I hope you found, valuable information in this podcast. And I wish you a productive week, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Hey, entrepreneurs, I hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something from the interview. If you're serious about creating systems for your business, automating processes and building up your team so that you can transfer the tedious daily tasks in order to focus on more high-level strategic tasks and work on your business and not in your business, I've created a guide for Amazon sellers named Capturing Systems and Creating SOPs that you can find at thesellerprocess.com/systems ebook, where you will learn how to leverage systems and SOPs in your Amazon business so that you can accomplish more by working less, optimize your time, automate and delegate tasks, and reap the benefits of being a true business owner and not simply an operator in your own business. Go download the ebook at thesellerprocess.com/systems ebook and start implementing all the tips and insights that I share with you. And leave us a review or a comment to let us know how the content we are sharing here is making an impact in your business. And have a productive week.